Hey, it's the psychological weather girl here. Election Day, USA. The air so thick with suspense that even Mercury stood still. Mercury, the messenger, so mobile, dexterous, and ping-ponging ubiquitously between dual nature. Mercury, transversing the underworld and the heavens in ways inaccessible to mortals and gods. The swift-footed and cool-headed psychopomp, dead in its tracks and hushed in the balances of the scales of beloved civility. Libra, as democracy holds its breath and the dramas weigh in on laughter and tears. Maybe I'm the one being dramatic. Probably not. I want to talk about the quincunx between the North Node of Manifest Destiny. Really, let's take that term into a broader context of universal principle rather than the definition appropriated by the forefathers of the current, let's call it, situation or situationship. In Gemini, surely the negotiator of lexicon and the rolling conjunction between Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in Capricorn, who sits, in this case, not necessarily in the eye of Providence's storm, but will certainly try to build panopticons to emulate its power, at least in principle. And that squares our frozen Mercury in fair Libra, by the way, which also sextiles dreamy Neptune in Pisces, in case you were wondering. Look, I don't know if it's just me being cynical and maybe a tad bit hyper-Darwinistic, but maybe you're starting to notice that there isn't much authority to hide behind at the moment. Oh, sure, we've got great bookkeepers. Well, half decent if you average it out between the lawfully good and artificial intelligence and corrupt cowboys maintaining the status quo. And maybe some archaic dominance hierarchy algorithms keeping the pecking order of culty phenomenon in line as a left brain and right brain wing whatever duke it out over the corpus callosum of life. But who is actually running the ship? What is, other than a series of statistically likely outcomes of the combinations of human nature and available resources, including the very structure of our extremely malleable but also extremely habituated monkey minds running this situationship? Current earthly and astrological events seem to emphasize the point that the emperor wears no clothes. The veil is dropping, and the colorful, ornate, reproductive dressings, reproducible, meaning biologically, so as to attract mates, to send forth an heir into the future, to sustain a kingdom, a lineage. Also reproducible as in mastery over the production of artifice, especially that which takes extravagantly beyond the span of our lives to deteriorate, to decorate culture top down from the level of grandeur to that of identity and impregnate minds so as to live on as a myth and an idol for the sake of propagation through propaganda. Neptune rules over propaganda and illusions and is currently retrograding away from a sextile to a rolling conjunction with Jupiter, expansiveness, Pluto, death, and Saturn, order. Mostly aspecting Jupiter, it has been setting the stage for big illusions, massive inflations. Neptune is a gas and ether, and Jupiter sucks up all the air in the room. This sextile then must go through Pluto, which brings generative force to everything it touches, but not before killing it, crushing it, decomposing it, and sending it back to source. Then it must go through Saturn, which needs to examine those raw materials that are left over, including the frightful gift of having experienced this collapse of inflation and systemic purge, and decide how to bring order to what we have before us. In retrograde, Neptune in its current state, by the power of suggestion, brings us to examine how we are deceiving and how we are being deceived. Pluto, next to Jupiter, where these illusions go to get hyperinflated and ultimately die, is squaring stationary Mercury within 3 degrees. We are being cosmically invited to bring stillness and awareness to where we have allowed false authority to fester and mislead us, and choose whether to surrender it to the fire and let it die off, and take the risks involved with facing the unknown, or we can cling to it and let it eventually drag us down with its not so buoyant after all hubris, while we relinquish personal responsibility for the state of the world and ultimately our power within it. The next planet in our rolling conjunction is Saturn, which Jupiter will be aligning with at 0 degrees Aquarius on the winter solstice, marking a new generation. The fun part about Saturn is that the only way to keep it from swallowing you, dear child, is to look into your shadows, explore and acknowledge your own limitations, and accept responsibility for where you are at, how you ended up there, and where you are going. This is how you are going to become heir to the kingdom of your own mind rather than swallowed up by Kronos, grandfather of time. The only thing left to do after these false structures, the lies we've been hiding, our power, responsibility, humility, sobriety, and wisdom behind, have proven themselves unsustainable and crumbled back into the earth, is to pick yourself up and dust yourself down, sitting completely naked with yourself, and assess what you have left to work with. What are the truths left remaining? Can you identify them? Can you have that conversation with yourself as you sit in the fire of what is? What is your current inheritance? That's what you're left with. Don't move. Not until you are moved from within. Through that alone can the reconstruction begin. This is Saturn biquintile, the north node in Gemini. The difference between a quincunx, a point of seemingly impossible, mutually exclusive friction, and a biquintile, a point of genius, is only a few degrees. Think about that in your life. The difference between a life of unresolved conflicts and the ecstasy of genius is a single shift of angles. Accept that ideological structures are breaking down. Watch it as it happens. Acknowledge what humanity is capable of, from the wretched to the illuminating, and ask yourself, what psychic, material, and human resources do you have to work with? If you don't have some sort of moral compass leading you, sit still and demand one from your own heart and soul. Demand yourself to see yourself as an extension of natural law, and do not move from the stillness until you are moved by the greater force that brought you into this world. This is the genius of Saturn in Capricorn, biquintile, north node in Gemini. By this intensive force, a new, simple, connected everyday life amongst tribe is attempting to form. New tribes are forming while others are breaking down. Pretense and illusion will only hold people together so long before axiom slips through the cracks of the inevitable debauchery that becomes the standard of living from a lie and brings falsehood to the ground. If only we all lived long enough to recognize this so clearly in our own lives. Gemini is the gateway to the tribal, the everyday, the exchange of information, the trade of goods, the opportunity in this breakdown is a chance at a clean slate upon which clearer truths and reality can be exacted and transacted. Fun fact: Chiron is in Aries by quintiling the sun and quintiling Pluto and the moon, which is squaring off with Neptune. If you haven't already been finding yourself in a position over these last couple months where you've been intermittently squaring off your emotional identity and default patterns against the collective unconscious, you might start to notice this phenomenon beginning to light up with the sun directly involved in this web of influence this time around. Chiron is the wounded healer, and Aries is the great I am. Through this combination, an easy choice to identify with is the victim programming. For example, I am wounded. Oh. Or more potently, to realize the unique position that you are in and embody it as a personal statement. Chiron was a centaur, a beast who harnessed the power of his animal urges, shifted them toward and through his neocortex, and adapted them into intellectual willpower and ultimately wisdom. In short, he was a maverick. He was also immortal, mortally wounded by his student Hercules, who was tasked with the 12 labors through the zodiac. Oh my God! At once, perpetually accessing eternal generative force while dying, he became a more complexified walking contradiction. This is you right now. This is me right now. Especially if you've got anything at about 18 degrees Gemini, 12 degrees Scorpio, or 6 degrees Aries. Aries, the great I am. Chiron, the sage possessed of such existential intricacy, together at last, arriving in tandem with the luminaries of emotional and vital identity, calling out to and from the creator gods for a reset of the spirits, for a wisdom that can only be achieved through first being primordial, yet poised toward a higher call, for an innocence that could only be discovered and rediscovered by recognizing and rolling in the dirt. This is where the fire of the inner sage begins to spark up. And this is how torches to carry through to the next paradigm shift are lit up to illuminate the dark corridors of our collective desires and inspire the hearts of humanity. You know, opposed to the torches that are used for book burnings. Good luck.